Almost there. One more setting. And one more piece of the unique is operational.
One down, 1 million to go. Speaking of which, boss, I found exactly none of the parts you wanted. A whole day at the junk pile, and all I turn up are a locker and some stupid conduits. Maybe next time. Boss, are you sure you got those settings right?
That came from down in engineering. Let's go. There's no time for that.
Boss, maybe we should see what's happening in engineering?
Hi, this is Dave Gilbert, the head CEO, whatever, of Wadjedi Games. You have activated commentary mode for Primordia. Those of you who have played our previous games know the drill by now. There'll be B and C icons scattered throughout your screen as you play. B for bloopers, C for commentary. And you'll also be interrupted like this while you play to get some extra information about a particular point that you're playing at. We're doing things a little bit differently this time, as you will not just be hearing from me, you'll also be hearing from the programmer, the artist, the composer, and the writer. So everyone's going to chime in, there'll be a lot to talk about, so let's get started.
Hey, I'm Mark Yohalem, and I did the story, puzzles, and dialogue for Primordia. I've worked on a lot of games in the past, but Primordia was the first adventure game I've ever finished. It's also the first game where I really had complete creative freedom. As we go along, I'll have a lot to say about design choices that we made in the course of building Primordia, but right now I just want to introduce myself. The first adventure game I ever played was Loom, and it completely hooked me. Some of my other favorites are Monkey Island 2, Grim Fandango, the Broken Sword series, and a fairly obscure game called Dragon Sphere. I also really like the Quest for Glory series, but that's more of a role-playing game hybrid. I guess I could claim to be a professional computer game writer, but the truth is, I'm a lawyer. Computer games are just something that I work on in my free time, and I really don't have that much of it these days between work, a wife, 2 kids, and a mortgage. Anyway, enough about me. Start playing the game, and as we go along, we can talk more.
Hello, I'm James Panas, and I'm the programmer in Primordia, and I probably have least interesting things to babble about.
Hey, this is Victor Flug from Wormwood Studios, co-creator of Primordia and art guy for the game. I'm going to be providing some commentary on the environmental art and the sprites throughout Primordia, and yeah, thanks for playing as well. I hope you enjoy the game.
There's no time for that.
You didn't really think that was gonna work again, did you? But let's try it again. Cause that talk good.
Primordia is very unique compared to the other Wadjedi games in that it had a full team. It had a dedicated writer, a dedicated artist, a dedicated programmer, and a dedicated composer. Normally you have 1 or 2 people doing many different things, which means that some of the other aspects of it kind of get fallen by the wayside, but not so with this one. You had Nathaniel completely focused on music, Mark completely focused on writing, so they didn't get distracted by any other aspect, and so each individual part of it really shined. So the end result is something really special and really awesome.
I really like this room. It's the color scheme I came up with for this background basically influenced the rest of Primordia. I really want to keep the color palette for Primordia pretty, I'll say cohesive. A lot of people will probably say samey or boring or dull or whatever. But yeah, I just liked sepia tones and stuff, and that kind of color scheme of corroded copper deck plating and kind of a rusty sky, grey clouds. Just, I don't know, worked for me, and I used it in a lot of other places. As you journey through the game, the color palette shifts quite a lot depending on the mood and where you're at and stuff, but it kind of sticks to this same thing. I kind of think of Primordia as a painting. It sounds weird, but in some ways I just think of all the art for Primordia as being one work of art, and I don't like it to change all that much in tone, really. I just wanted the whole thing to feel cohesive, and I like backgrounds that look like this, and I wanted basically the whole game to be filled with backgrounds that I liked looking at and stuff, so that's how that came about. The telescope deck, probably my favorite background in the whole game. It's the first one I ever designed for Primordia when I was doing pre-production sketches and getting thumbnails done for some of the places I wanted to show in the dunes and stuff. My first piece of art for Primordia was just a map of the unique leading up to Metropole, basically, and I had a few landmarks in there. I think Goliath's head was in there. That was just an idea I came up with while sketching this map thing. I'm like, oh, I'll do a buried robot and put a head in there. And I think Mark kind of worked from that and created basically the whole Goliath area, which is has some of my favorite backgrounds in the game. So that was really a good way to go. I think I mentioned this elsewhere in the commentary, but originally Goliath's head was the first background I painted up for Primordia, but it didn't look so great, and Mark wanted a different kind of style for it. And that's how we got the current design there, which I really like. It turned out way better than the first one I had, so that was a definite win there. But yeah, telescope deck. I really like this room. It's the color scheme I came up with for this background basically influenced the rest of Primordia. I really want to keep the color palette for Primordia pretty, I'll say cohesive. A lot of people will probably say samey or boring or dull or whatever. But yeah, I just like sepia tones and stuff, and that kind of color scheme of corroded copper deck plating and kind of a rusty sky, grey clouds. Just, I don't know, worked for me, and I used it in a lot of other places. As you journey through the game, the color palette shifts quite a lot depending on the mood and where you're at and stuff, but it kind of sticks to the same thing. I guess that might come from the fact that I've been illustrating for years and years, and really only got into game graphics recently. I did concept art for games for a couple of years before Primordia, but I'm kind of new at the whole game graphics thing, and when I kind of think of Primordia as a painting, and it sounds weird, but in some ways I just think of all the art for Primordia as being one work of art, and I don't like it to change all that much in tone, really. I just wanted the whole thing to feel cohesive, and I like backgrounds that look like this, and I wanted basically the whole game to be filled with backgrounds that I liked looking at and stuff, so that's how that came about. I'm going to talk a bit about Crispin here, because I'm not sure where else to do it, so yeah. Crispin's sprite design, character design, or whatever, has been around for a long, long time. I think it was maybe the third or fourth robot I drew for Primordia. Originally he had just like 3 orange eyes. This is before he was actually Crispin. I was just drawing random robots and stuff, and Mark came up with the character of Crispin, and we needed a sprite kind of placeholder, and I threw this little kind of spinning top looking guy. Not the most unique design in the world, but I don't know, there's something about it I kind of liked. And eventually we kind of wanted to get, I don't know, a little bit more emotion into Crispin's character, and I thought that just these 3 lights on his head weren't really portraying that all that much, so I did some more design sketches, messed around with the concept, and came up with a viewer, kind of the blue screen he has, which is actually like a cathode ray tube or something like that Horatio's scavenged from out of the dunes. It's definitely good old analog technology. There's a lot of analog tech in Primordia.
one case of executive meddling, and I'm sure I'm going to be talking about more of them, was that I asked them to cut down this introductory scene. It used to be a lot longer. Horatio and Crispin talked about humanism, they talked about Metropole, they talked about the world and themselves, and I asked if that could be cut down. Because you'll learn all about that stuff anyway, very shortly, in a much more efficient way. And there's no reason to overload the player with all that information right away. I think the goal of introductory dialogue is to give you just enough information to tell you who you are, where you are, and what you're doing, and leave the rest up to the player. You want to make this world inviting enough to explore. And this world is beautiful enough that you'll want to do that.
You didn't really think that was going to work again, did you? But
Primordia is very...
I really like this room. The telescope.
What?
There's no time. We need to get to engineering.
Boss, maybe we should see what's happening in engineering?
There's no time. There's no time. There's no time. There's no time.
Logan Cunningham, who plays Horatio, needs no introduction, especially if you're familiar with indie games and a game called Bastion, which won 1,000 awards and is really well known for the narration. A character named Rux does the narration, and that was narrated by Logan Cunningham. And that game basically is known for his voice. And I was introduced to Logan through Sarah Almale, who plays Clarity. For our previous game, Resonance, I needed a guy who could do that kind of low, gruff voice and who could sound natural at the same time. And she recommended Logan. She said, would you be interested in working with him? And of course, knowing his work on Bastion, I leapt at the chance. And he was so great to work with on Resonance that I knew that he was the guy to play Horatio. And I brought him in, I think, 2 or 3 times, getting different auditions each time and sending it to the Primordia team and saying, I am going to bring this guy in as often as it takes for me to convince you that this is the guy. And it didn't take that many times, but they liked him. And so he ended up being cast in the part. And I thought he was wonderful. When we released Gemini Rue in early 2012, it was such a success and did so well that I thought it would be a good idea to try publishing other games, Gemini Rue being a game that we had just published, we didn't write ourselves. So I looked around for other games that showed a lot of promise, but where the developers might not have had the experience or the time or the motivation to get it finished and get it out. And we found 3. We found Icebox's The New Guys, we found Vince 12's Resonance, and Wormwood's Primordia. And that's how we got involved with them. And what really attracted me to this game was the art style. It is just one of the most uniquely visual games on our roster. I like to say that its art style is different because it actually has one. The art in this game tells half of the story. The old gritty mechanical structures and devices, the complete blasted wasteland, it tells half the story, and it creates most of the atmosphere and feeling you get when playing the game, and that's what really attracted me to this in the first place.
There's no time.
Boss?
Crispin, get behind me. Who are you and what do you want? Power.
I think he wants the power core, boss.
Stop right there. This ship belongs to me.
Forfeit. Enemy. Plunder.
I don't think he's too keen on private property.
Get away from the power core.
Forfeit.
When you have an essentially cerebral main villain like Metromind, it's important to have a henchman who creates a serious physical threat. That henchman can act as a kind of embodiment of the cerebral villain and give the player something to actively fight against during the course of the game. You see this motif used a lot in James Bond movies, where you'll typically have a villain like Goldfinger and then he'll have a henchman like Oddjob. It's also pretty commonly used in comic books. Here, with Scraper, the idea was that you would have this character who keeps interfering with your progress, and every time you have to fight Scraper or he takes something away from you, it reminds you of the conflict that started the game and gives you a sense of continuity as you go through the obstacles over the course of the game.
Boss? Boss? Horatio? Come on, Horatio, wake up!
Oh.
Whew, you're okay.
What happened?
Well, Big Ugly threw you out of the ship, and then he said plunder, again, and then he left with our power core.
Basad.
Yep,
How much charge have you got?
10%. You?
I'll be fine. We just need to get the emergency generator up and running.
Or we could just go to Metropole, city of glass and light. Free energy for one and all.
Don't believe everything you hear. Metropole is trouble. But if you want to go, you've got free will in a maglev unit.
With that guilt subroutine you put in me, I wouldn't even make it halfway.
Actually, with a 10% charge, you wouldn't even get that far. So I suggest we get the generator working.
One problem with voice acting and having a lot of really dramatic, emotionally charged scenes at the very beginning is that you're not really into the character as much. You haven't really grown into it. You don't have the cadences, the energy. It's just not there. And one of my mistakes was having Logan record these sequences where he's getting attacked by Scraper and everything, recording those at the very beginning. It was like the first thing in the script, and no one was really happy with how it came out, and so I decided to wait until the very end. I decided to make the very first thing Horatio says. I decided to go back and make it the very last line that Logan recorded. So these sequences here, the last words that Logan spoke while doing the VO for this game.
You and your projects.
Man built us to build, Crispin. Now, come on.
The challenge with the introduction is how to convey a lot of information to the player very quickly and efficiently. So we had to set up the world, we had to set up the characters of Horatio and Crispin, let the player know that those characters were scavengers who gathered junk out of the wasteland. We had to introduce an antagonist, and we had to set up a reason why the heroes had to go on their quest. Since this isn't a typical kind of good versus evil story, it can't just be the rise of some demon that they're going off to stop. In this case, it's something much more personal, which is that they need to get back the power core that they need to survive. This was inspired by the game Fallout, which of course starts with the hero having to go out into the wasteland to get back the water chip that the vault needs. Here, however, it's even more personal because it's not that you're trying to help other people who live in your home, it's that you're trying to help yourself.
Maybe I'm just a sucker for flashing, but then my mouth is crazy. Okay. Was it not? Was it not perfect? In fact, fuck it. You don't even need to record anything else, because I've now given you everything you could ever need. Cancel the rest of the Blackwell series. My work today will never be surpassed. Alright.
The one area of this game where I was kind of an executive meddler, I was really the hard-ass producer type and insisted on doing things my way, was the voice acting. And when I first made the deal with Wormwood, there was already two actors cast as Horatio and Crispin. And they were totally fine, but the problem was that they were not local. They weren't from New York City. They were from elsewhere. And I would have to work with them remotely if I was going to keep them on board. And that was a major problem with me, because I really prefer working with local actors. They could come into the studio, I can direct them face to face, fix any problems with direction right away. I always find working with remote actors takes so much longer and is so much harder that I only like to work with a remote actor when the character is a very minor one that doesn't require a lot of direction. And for a major character, that wasn't going to work, especially for a player character like Horatio and a major character like Crispin. So I felt really bad about it. It was kind of this awkward moment when I really insisted on, yeah, sorry guys, I gotta work with local people. And so we ended up recasting the characters with Abe and Logan.
I had done a lot of demos for what style of music to have in Primordia, and we couldn't quite find what we wanted. At one point, Dave Gilbert, the producer, stepped in and basically said, well, let's just go ahead and try doing music for certain sections of the games. And so I took the latest demo I had done, which I really felt like stood out among the demos, and I converted that to the opening theme music that you hear when you first start the game, which ended up becoming Horatio's theme later on. The other song I did around the same time was the menu music, and both of which kind of formed the foundation of what would be the style Primordia would have throughout most of the game.
Crispin's sprite design, character design, or whatever, has been around for a long, long time. I think it was maybe the third or fourth robot I drew for Primordia. Originally he had just like 3 orange eyes. This is before he was actually Crispin. I was just drawing random robots and stuff, and Mark came up with a character of Crispin, and we needed a sprite kind of placeholder, and I threw this little kind of spinning top looking guy. Not the most unique design in the world, but I don't know, there's something about it I kind of liked. And eventually we kind of wanted to get, I don't know, a little bit more emotion into Crispin's character, and I thought that just these 3 lights on his head weren't really portraying that all that much, so I did some more design sketches, messed around with the concept, and came up with a viewer, kind of the blue screen he has, which is actually like a cathode ray tube or something like that Horatio's scavenged from out of the dunes. It's definitely good old analog technology. There's a lot of analog tech in Primordia. Crispin's sprite design, character design, or whatever.
I must have dropped my data pouch when I was thrown out of the unique.
I had done a lot of demos for one style. I had done a lot of demos for what I had done a lot of demos for what style of music to
Assad, its memory got wiped. Easy enough to have the good old junk pile's coordinates back in, though. I can't pick that up.
Now, I'm not a fancy engineer like you, boss, but it seems like the unique isn't gonna fly without its tail on.
It's one of the unique's turbines.
The big engine that couldn't.
I can't move this without some kind of crane, which I certainly don't have time to build now. I can't move the... It's one of the unique... Crispin, could you reattach that engine to the unique?
Very funny, boss.
Nothing worth salvaging. A broken robot I dragged out of the junk pile. I salvaged the sarcasm coprocessor from it for Crispin.
Yeah, it works great. Is that a gumball machine?
No, it's a robot's head.
Ah, I wanted a gumball. I'm not doing that.
I can't pick... It's a segment of Gordium electrical conduit. Some very sticky grease. Blasted leaking gasket.
Is it blasted or leaking?
I've tried patching this a dozen different ways without success. I can't just scoop it up.
In coming up with Primordia's protagonist, one of the things that was most important to me was to find a hero who would logically do the things that the player would have to do in the game. Now that's fairly easy in a first-person shooter or in a role-playing game, where the activities that the player does are typically heroic actions. But in an adventure game, a lot of what you're doing is things like gathering junk, fitting it together, solving puzzles that make very little sense for a typical sort of action hero. Now there's some adventure games that did this really well. Obviously the Indiana Jones games are a good example, but then you have other games like Gabriel Knight or The Longest Journey where what the player is doing makes no sense for the protagonist. So Horatio had to be a kind of character who would go around building machines from items that he finds throughout the game world, someone who would help other robots when he encounters them, and not try to solve every situation just through brute force. So I decided he would be the scavenger who's religiously committed to the idea of fixing the broken things in the world. Even before you start the game, he's already doing that with his airship, the Unique. So you get this sense that when you're doing that as the player, you're doing something that already Horatio as a character was doing in his own life. As a consequence, every puzzle you solve, every item you gather, reinforces Horatio's character rather than undermining it. One of the things that's tricky when you're writing dialogue in a made-up world is how you handle slang terms and also just ordinary words in the English language that have their roots in particular cultural conventions or historical events that happened in our world that might not have a significance in the created world. A really basic example of this is that if you had some high-technology aliens talking about the element that is atomic number 99 on our periodic table, it wouldn't make any sense for them to call it Einsteinium, because there's no Einstein in their culture. But it's even just a problem with ordinary speech. You can't have robots saying things like, I put my foot in my mouth when they don't have a foot or a mouth. So what I tried to do was come up with various slang terms and expressions and curses that made sense from the perspective of a machine. The one we used most commonly is BSOD, B-S-O-D, which is short for blue screen of death. Incidentally, this is itself somewhat problematic because there's no reason to think that the robots in this game would actually have a blue screen of death when they crash. All the same, it's a way to have them say something other than God damn it, which wouldn't make sense for them to say since they have no God. Even Horatio, who worships man, probably wouldn't say man damn it because there's no indication that he has hell in his religion. So Basad was sort of the go-to curse. Throughout the game, we use these beautiful UIs that Vic drew, not really to create more difficult puzzles, because the interactions with them really aren't puzzle-like, so much as just to create a tactile feel to the game. So when you look at a monitor that contains information, rather than just having Horatio say the information out loud, instead you see a close-up of the monitor with the information there. When you go to repair the emergency generator, it's not like it's hard to figure out where to put the spark plug or the conduit, but letting you actually put them in place rather than just use them on a hot spot of the generator and the normal walking around screen really makes the player feel, I don't know if immersed is quite the right word, maybe just more engaged with the game.
There's supposed to be a power-bearing conduit between this socket and the ship, but I never got around to putting one together.
Now who's the procrastinator?
There's supposed to be a... It's not going to do anything until the generator's fixed. It's the generator's ignition switch. It's not going to do anything until the generator's fixed. Crispin, when I told you to find a new spark plug, did you just shove my conductive putty into the old one?
Maybe.
No wonder the generator isn't working. A broken spark plug. At least the putty is still good. The generator is missing a spark plug.
So this is kind of a visual Easter egg. UNNIC is actually the top half of HORUS. In other words, the unique is actually the Horus, as the player later finds out. The bottom half of the ship's name was blasted off when it crash landed.
It's the unique's tag. Without it, I'd have never known the ship's name.
Apparently, building a giant airship doesn't require proper spelling.
Apparently not. It's the unique's tag. A sturdy cable. It leads up to the unique's main hatch.
If only you could have told that to Big Ugly before he decided to cut his way in. You know, boss, if you're ever wondering what I would do, feel free to just ask.
I'll keep that in mind.
The hint system has been a great accomplishment to me in Primordia. Basically because it's a static library of hints that judge the situation in the game regarding on how the player has progressed and what has he solved, and provide the hinting required.
Crispin Horatio build, version 1. There'll be version 2 once I put some arms on him. He's my best and only friend. Good old Crispin.
So, what exactly do we need to fix the generator?
Some conduit and a new spark plug.
Sorry, boss, I've got sand in my audio receptors. I'll let you know when it's out. Hey, I have an idea. Why don't we go to the junk pile so you can look for some spare parts?
Am I detecting hostility?
Hostile? Me? I'm not even armed. Why do you keep asking me to figure things out? I'm just a sidekick, boss. Boss, maybe we should try to get back inside the unique and make sure everything's okay? Sorry, boss, I've got sand in my audio. Hey, I have an idea.
Am I detecting hostility?
Boss, did you ever consider that sometimes I just run out of clever ideas? Boss, maybe... Danger. So, what exactly do... Boss, did you... Hey,
Am I hostile?
why do you keep... Hey,
Am I hostile?
47, boss. The answer is 47.
Don't you mean 42?
Maybe. Hey,
Am I hostile? What was I thinking leaving all my lanterns up there? What was I thinking leaving all my lanterns up there? It's pitch black in there. An old generator.
Very funny, boss. That's way too big for me to get, boss, and you know it.
Could you grab that lantern?
Sure thing, boss.
You know, I always wanted to be able to fly. That's why I built you with a maglev unit.
Not so that you could store tools on hard-to-reach ledges.
Well, that too. Good old...
Hey, I have an idea.
Am I hostile? It's pitch... The hatch is unresponsive. Only a little sliver left before the moon wanes entirely.
Well, I'm glad we're not the only ones running out of power.
Same old moon. Same old moon.
Hey, I have an idea.
Am I hot? This is no time for sitting around. An old captain's chair. I moved it here from navigation. A large observational telescope. The data pouch is registered to me. Without power from the ship, the telescope won't work.
Bad timing with those repairs, huh, boss? Sure, boss. I'll fly up there and bring you back a moon rock. Oh, wait, I can't, since I don't have hands. Not gonna happen. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of the dark. Hey,
Am I hot?
That's I'm not doing that. Strange clouds, huh, boss? Strange.
It's too dark to see the ladder rungs. bedtime reading. I don't need to bring these with me.
After all, boss, life is stranger than fiction.
It's the gospel of man.
Going to pray for a miracle, boss?
We are man's miracle, Crispin. Let's hope that's enough.
So that's where you keep it.
Why were you looking for my plasma torch?
No reason.
I always used to hate puzzles like this that rely on a kind of reverse dramatic irony, where the character knows something that's obvious to him, but the player doesn't, like where he left his keys the last night, what the phone number of his girlfriend is, how he should drive to work, things like that. But here there actually is a reason for doing it, and maybe there is in other games too, which is to remind the player that he and the character are actually not the same person. Now, to some degree, you want the player to be immersed in the role, but when you have a character like Horatio, who has this backstory that turns out to be quite important, that the player doesn't know anything about, having a puzzle like this lets him know that there is a kind of unreliable narrator here. In other words, you can't trust that Horatio has told you everything that you have to know.
For cutting and welding, it can't be beat.
The Gospel of Man is really one of my favorite things in the game. It's absolutely beautiful visually. Victor agreed to do all of these great animations for the page turning, these beautiful illustrations, the capital letters with the filigree around them, none of which is necessary to convey the information that the player actually needs to advance in the game. The whole Gospel, with its music, with the artwork, even the text, is really about setting the flavor for Horatio as a character. It also serves a fairly important narrative role, which is to tell the player that Horatio and the other humanists really have no idea who human beings are. The man they worship is a machine, not a biological being. It's something purely legendary. Finally, I got to give a shout out to some of my favorite games as a kid, especially Sky Roads.
I've read enough.
That piece of sheet metal really ties the room together, boss.
I can't pick that up. This is no time for a nap,
I still don't see why I don't get a bed.
because you have a flat bottom to rest on.
Boss, were you checking out my bottom? Hey, I have an idea. Why don't we...
Am I... The controls for this hatch are unresponsive.
Ooh, spooky. So, what exactly do...
Good thing there's still some power in the circuit.
Boss, shouldn't you have thought of that before coming down here? We could have been stuck.
I could have just ridden you back to the deck.
Really?
No. Routing that much power to your maglev unit would cause it to explode.
Yeah, right.
Sorry. I couldn't find a working fuse to solve the problem.
I'm a floating bomb. I'm a floating bomb. Sweet.
As Anton Chekhov would say, if you have a floating bomb in Act 1, it needs to explode by Act 3.
Primordia is very unique compared to the other Wadgetite.
I'll need at least 5 pieces to be able to build a conduit long enough to run the generator to the unique. A small lump of electrically conductive putty. A good length of heavy-duty cable designed for carrying data. A reliable electric lantern that I cobbled together years ago. For cutting and welding, it can't be beat. Totally unilluminating. Ha, not after what happened last time I gave it to him.
I'd love to help, boss, but I'm all mouth and no hands. Very funny, boss. Where would I carry it? I get it. A big robot named Man built everything. Just no more preaching, please. I get it. I just...
More Gordium conduit. There's no way I can reach that. I'll need at least 5 pieces. As much as I'd love to fix that leak someday, we have more important things to do. Plus, it would be a waste of the putty. The putty's sticky enough already.
If that red light went off, I bet the train would start going.
Crispin, sometimes I think you're trying to get me to waste time.
Who, me?
There's nothing worth bothering with. It's just scrap.
Boss, just think of all the brothers and sisters you could make for me from all that junk.
One of you is more than enough. It's just scrap.
I'm not doing that until you build me some arms.
It's just scrap. It's just scrap. It's just scrap. It's just endless junk. Endless junk. There's nothing worth bothering with.
That's...
It's 3 pieces of Gordium conduit. Unfortunately, one of them is completely corroded and worthless. There's a piece of Gordium conduit way back there. There's a piece of Gordium... Crispin, can you go in there and get that piece of conduit?
I suppose. That would have been a lot easier with hands, boss.
Looks like some kind of lockbox.
How do you think a train wound up out here, boss?
Maybe they brought it here by boat.
Very funny.
It's locked tight. It's closed. It's locked tight. It's a reinforced steel. It's a reinforced steel. Let's see if this works.
Is that a spark plug, boss? Who locks up a spark plug?
Actually, I think that box was some kind of machine.
You killed it!
Recycled it. I guess it was actually some kind of machine. I'm pretty sure it was already dead, though. I guess it was actually some kind of machine. I'm pretty sure it was already dead, though. Just a run-of-the-mill spark plug. 5 segments of Gordium conduit. Time for a little welding.
Wow, that was easier than I thought it would be.
Originally, the entrance to the subway for the journey to Metropole was going to be through the train door here. For various reasons, we cut that, mostly because of the way I designed the subway areas themselves. It kind of made the positioning of everything really complicated, and I sent out diagrams of how it would work to everyone, and no one could make sense of them because they were scribbled messes, and yeah, we just ended up making the dome area the entrance to the subway, which ended up being one of the screens I liked a bit more. I like the kind of blowing wind atmosphere.
When Victor, the artist, first asked me to work on the game, he had this idea for a silent companion. As the game went along, Crispin really took on a life of his own, fueled in large part by the fact that James, the programmer, fell in love with him and kept asking me to give him more and more ridiculous lines. The truth is, a good sidekick has to be a foil to the hero, whether it's Sancho Panza to Don Quixote or Odysseus to Diomedes. That means both a personality difference and a different set of skills. So with Horatio, you have this grounded, serious character, while Crispin is quite literally flighty. Crispin is able to do things that Horatio can't. He can fly up and grab things, or at least knock things. He can fit into small spaces. He can cross over barriers that Horatio can't. He also looks at things from a totally different perspective, and so he's in a position to advise Horatio when Horatio gets stuck. In terms of direct influences, probably the strongest one is Mort from Planescape Torment. Anyone who's played Planescape will probably recognize some of that. But there's a long line of these kinds of flying, sarcastic sidekicks that I was drawing upon, whether it's Cedric from King's Quest V, Zizix from Sacrifice, or even Orko from He-Man.
3 segments of Gordium conduit. 4 segments of Gordium conduit. I feel like the Count.
Yeah, 4 segments.
5 segments.
Given that quite early in the game you have a robot poking around a junk pile, it's inevitable that there will be comparisons to Wally and to Machinarium. And I should say I quite like both of those, particularly Wally. But at least for me, neither of those had a particularly strong influence in how I thought about the setting, at least not consciously. I would say the bigger influences are a few books, particularly a book called City by Clifford Simak, which I didn't even like, but had this interesting idea of man being a mythological creature for these robots and talking dogs that survived after a human apocalypse. Another big influence was the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy. The whole idea of the journey there and this father and son figure trying to cross a desolate wasteland really influenced the way I thought about Horatio and Crispin's relationship. Finally, there's a book called Viraconium by John Harrison that also depicts this far post-apocalyptic setting with these poetic images of desolation. One that sticks with me is the description of the metal salt marshes, these bogs that are full of runoff from heavy metals from industry that existed far, far in the past. And it's just presented as something that the characters take as a given, that you would have these super polluted marshlands. To them it's sort of fantastic, but to us, with the different perspective we have, we look at that as an ecological monstrosity. In the same way, the characters here are really not aware of the scope of the cataclysm, so they walk around through this wasteland, you have all this ruined machinery and absolutely no biological life, but Horatio and Crispin seem fairly unaffected by that. Given that quite early in the game you have a robot poking around a junk pile, it's inevitable that there will be comparisons to Wally and to Machinarium. And I should say I quite like both of those, particularly Wally. But at least for me, neither of those had a particularly strong influence in how I thought about the setting, at least not consciously. I would say the bigger influences are a few books, particularly a book called City by Clifford Simak, which I didn't even like, but had this interesting idea of man being a mythological creature for these robots and talking dogs that survived after a human apocalypse. Another big influence was the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy. The whole idea of the journey there and this father and son figure trying to cross a desolate wasteland really influenced the way I thought about Horatio and Crispin's relationship. Finally, there's a book called Viraconium by John Harrison that also depicts this far post-apocalyptic setting with these poetic images of desolation. One that sticks with me is the description of the metal salt marshes, these bogs that are full of runoff from heavy metals from industry that existed far, far in the past. And it's just presented as something that the characters take as a given, that you would have these super polluted marshlands. To them it's sort of fantastic, but to us, with the different perspective we have, we look at that as an ecological monstrosity. In the same way, the characters here are really not aware of the scope of the cataclysm, so they walk around through this wasteland. You have all this ruined machinery and absolutely no biological life, but Horatio and Crispin seem fairly unaffected by that.
I like this room. It has one of the few lines of dialogue in the game that I wrote and then slipped in there. If you click on the kind of boxy robotic looking thing in the foreground, and Horatio said, it looks like a P1, or is it a P2? That's actually one of the prototypes of the Honda robot. There's a ton of kind of real world robotics I threw in there just as a kind of nod to these robots I'd always thought were really cool, and just kind of wanted to include them in Primordia.
Originally, the game didn't have ambient sound effects, just music that kind of tried to convey that ambience within the music. Thankfully, Wadjidai brought me in early enough in the project that we did get beta testers' feedback through the website, and we got to hear that some of them really wanted to hear like kind of more regular wind sounds in the game and more ambiences, and so I ended up doing ambiences for every background in the game, and I think it's a lot better for it. So I'm really glad the beta testers paid attention to sound.
I mentioned before how we had some remote actors originally cast as Crispin and Horatio, and there was a guy named Chris True, who's this comedian, lives out in the Southwest, I think, who was originally cast for Crispin. And when I originally said to him I kind of wanted to go with a local actor, he said he was going to be in New York for about a week and change, and we could do some recording then. And I figured, hey, that would be great. He could come here, he can come in, get maybe 3 sessions in, we'd get most of it, and then he can do the rest remotely, because by then we would have had a chance to get into the character a bit. Unfortunately, when he got here, he ended up being kind of sick, and he wasn't able to come in, and I felt really bad about it, and it turned out he was on tour with his comedy troupe and wasn't able to get home and record for like another month or 2, and it was really one of those awkward, horrible business decisions that you just have to make sometimes. And I told him that I'm sorry, I needed someone who could come in right away and do it. A month or 2 just wasn't short enough, because I was hoping to have most of it done by then. And so I had a bunch of auditions, and Abe was the runaway favorite. And originally I didn't want to cast him, because he already does the floating sidekick thing in Blackwell. But he was just so naturally funny and awesome that we just couldn't choose anybody else. So, and I think you'll all agree, Abe just did a marvelous job as Crispin.
The rain is probably the trickiest and favorite part that I coded in Primordia. Basically, there's an animation running over the top, and there are all kinds of particles around them. We used to have it around the game, but that proved to be a problem because of the frame drop, so we kinda stuck with it for the intro and the junk pile. The junk pile being the better place, since you can see the particles near the train slowly falling, and you can see particles of rain in the floor and different surfaces.
Goliath's head that Mark made me change from my original design and ended up being a lot better than what I came up with. So I've got him to thank for a lot of the good visuals in Primordia, especially when I started to run out of ideas, and he'd come in and yeah, we'd work together to create something that looked good.
You know, boss, you never used to ask me for advice this often back before you got thrown out of the Unique. Do you think it's possible you damaged your processor in the fall? Okay, give me a second. Something's coming to me. Actually, I have no idea. Abort. Retry. Fail. Definitely fail. Please don't retry. Why do you keep asking me to figure things out? We should definitely explore the cliffside arcology next.
The what?
Oh, I guess we haven't found that yet. Could you please stop bothering me? I'm trying to finish this level of Zgred.
What?
You know, that puzzle game you installed on me when you built me.
But
Look, you have your puzzles, I have mine. Boss, sometimes a builder just has to let his creation figure things out for himself.
I'm your builder, Crispin.
I know. That's what makes this particularly sad. What would man do, boss? Okay. Something's coming to me. We should...
What?
Oh. Sorry, boss.
It's just still red. Still red. Better just to... There's nothing. It's just...
One thing I really hate in adventure games, and particularly in some modern adventure games like Dreamfall and Siberia, is when they make you backtrack, usually with very slow walking animation, clearly for no good reason other than to just extend the playing time of the game. So you have to walk to point A to get the item that you have to bring back to point B to get the item that you have to bring back to the person at point A to unlock the door at point B. That structure is commonly used in Dreamfall and it drove me crazy. One of the ways that we wanted to avoid that here was just not requiring a lot of unnecessary backtracking. But the other thing that we wanted to do is put in a fast travel system so that players could just quickly get from location to location and not get bogged down in slow walking animations.
It's just endless junk.
I'm not doing that until... Is that really the best idea? Is that really the... I don't really... I'm not doing that. Is that You know... I'm not doing... You know, boss, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
One of the things that's tricky when you're writing...
Okay, fine. Here's an idea. You stop bothering me. Hop on, boss. I'll fly us to the moon.
Very funny.
Okay, give me some... Okay, but after all, I don't want to spoil the surprise. Thabaslu 135, Gabaslu 122, Maba...
Crispin, that's not code. That's just gibberish.
You always ruin everything, boss. Okay, but I'll give it after all. That
Crispin.
I thought we were in trouble when Big Ugly stole our core. But just like that, problem solved.
The problem is not solved.
Well, I agree. The noise leaves something to be desired.
This is an emergency generator, Crispin.
Well, it was an emergency, boss.
It only runs for a few days, if that.
Oh. Well, do we have another one?
No, which means it still is an emergency.
Well, in that case, first dibs on the recharge station.
I think the first post-apocalyptic story in the Western canon is the story of Noah and the Flood. Some of those motifs show up again and again in post-apocalyptic literature that follows. You have this safe place, whether it's the Ark, or a vault in Fallout, or a Fallout shelter in another story, or a secluded town in a valley, but all the time you have this safe place where more or less righteous people gather to survive the apocalypse, and it actually tends to end on a hopeful note that the apocalypse has somehow purged the world of the unrighteous people, and now those who survived are able to start it anew in some good way. I don't think Primordia quite has that kind of happy ending. You'll have to judge for yourselves when you get there. But nevertheless, the same thematic ideas are present here, where we quite literally have this ship that Horatio is building despite the skepticism of others like Crispin. And the ship, although it post-dates the apocalypse, is nevertheless a safe place against the violence in the outside world. I don't think these themes, by the way, are necessarily deliberately put into anything, or maybe not even deliberately put into Primordia. In doing this commentary track, I have this interesting opportunity to reflect on how things got the way they were in the game. And in doing so, I have to think back about all the things that I've read and have influenced me or I've seen, and more or less do a genealogy on my own creation.
So, what's the plan, boss?
We need to recover our power core.
Or we could just take the train to Metropole and live in luxury.
First of all, there is no train to Metropole. And second, even with full charges, we can't just walk there. But more importantly, I hate that city. It's in my core logic. I don't know why, but I can't change it.
Okay. In that case, can't you just make us a new power core?
Yes, but I need some kind of strong energy source for that.
And you just make one of those too? I'm just asking.
No, but somewhere around here are the plans for an energy sensor.
That's awfully convenient.
I designed it a long time ago, before I made you. I even found a sodium iodide crystal to use in the sensor, though man alone knows where it's buried now.
A big problem in any game these days, which requires voice acting, which most games do, is that once something is recorded, it's set in stone. And if you forget to record something, or somehow it doesn't get picked up by the script, or the takes are bad, or something, then it requires a bit of creative juggling and editing in order to get it right. And this little conversation here, it sounds maybe ever so slightly awkward, but maybe that's because I remember the original conversation where Crispin says something like, that hit the spot. And Horatio says, don't get too comfortable, we have to look for our power core. And Crispin says, but maybe we can go to Metropole. Those first two lines, for some reason, didn't get put into the script, it didn't get recorded, which was a problem. So I kind of juggled lines around. I took Crispin saying, so what's the plan, from a completely different part of the game. I think he says it in the train station, and put it here. And I think I merged two lines together to make Horatio say we have to find our power core, just to make that conversation make sense. So pulling back the curtain a little bit to show you how I have to cover up my own mistakes.
When Vic initially set up the UI for the game, there was this countdown timer right on the toolbar. The idea was that Horatio's power charge would be running down over the course of the whole game. Eventually he would run out of power and just shut down. On a conceptual level, I love timers in games. I thought it was a great idea in Fallout how you had a certain number of days to get the water chip. It lends an air of realism to the game and makes it feel like the world is alive. But the problem in an adventure game is twofold. First, when you have a system of fast travel like we have, there's a real question of how the time should actually be counted. Should an hour pass when you fast travel from one location to another? Because if that's the way we set it up, what you end up doing is strongly discouraging the player from going back from location to location, and they wind up doing things like save scumming or not exploring and feeling constrained. But if you just end up measuring the playing time and treating fast travel as not taking any time, then you've lost that whole point of realism that you were trying to have at the outset. The other problem is that timers create Walking Dead situations. Either you have to give the player so much time that there's no chance of him ever running out of it, in which case you've actually destroyed the narrative urgency that you were trying to enhance by adding the timer in the first place, which is really the case in Fallout or Magic Candle. Or you run the risk that if the player plays too slowly and the timer starts to matter, that the player can actually still be allowed to play the game but not have enough time to complete it. All that will do is frustrate the player when he has to try to dig up a saved game where he still has enough time, and he ends up sort of metagaming, in other words, not playing it through as if he were Horatio, but playing it through as if he's a player trying to avoid this mechanic he doesn't like. Finally, then you have to add in all sorts of other mechanisms like ways for the characters to get recharged as you go through it, and all of those wound up seeming like they would just be a lot of trouble to code and probably not that much fun. So the end result is no timer. Even though Horatio says they're running out of time, the player can dilly-dally as much as he wants.
This is the second time we're hearing Horatio's theme song. The first time was on top of the telescope. It also plays later in the game when you find Horace's memory log, as well as in the end music by Kim Bookbinder. The only other real reoccurring theme in the game is Metromind's theme, which plays when she or Scraper is around. In most cases, these versions are really different though.
Weary wanderers, come, join us in Metropole, city of glass and light.
Crispin, why is your diary still scattered all over the floor?
Are you going to keep nagging me until we run out of power, boss?
Yes.
Come, join us in Metropole.
It's Crispin's log. In order to preserve his privacy and my sanity, I've avoided reading it.
Parts of the greater whole.
It's Crispin's log. It's Crispin's log. In order to
Is that really the best idea you can come up with, boss?
You're right. What was I thinking asking you to clean up after yourself?
Join us in Metropole, city of
It's
glass
Crispin's
and
log.
light.
In order to preserve It's Crispin in order
Not?
Here is haven for
a
all
volume about subsumption architecture among maintenance labori.
in Metropole.
I don't need that. I don't need
Is that really the best?
Equal parts.
It's Crispin's in order to preserve
Not?
Join us, and together
It's in order to it's in order it's in order it's in order it's in order I don't need any of these right now.
Let's hope it stays that way. Unless you've got some gynoid design stuffed in those, I'm not wasting my time.
Since when are you interested in technical diagrams?
You never know when you're gonna have to handle a gynoid, boss.
I don't need any of these.
Let
I don't
Coordinates 894. All are equal in Metropole.
It's the uniques recharging.
Greater whole.
We're fine on energy for now.
And together
We're fine on
begin a
we're
new
fine.
Primordium.
Hey, boss, what do all these buttons and switches do?
I think there's some sort of defense mechanisms, but I can't figure them out.
City of
I've never been able to figure it out.
Hey, boss,
I think
energy is shared with all robots. Here is haven for all and strength in numbers. Come, join us in
it
Metropole.
already has a full charge. There's no reason to cut that.
All are equal
Ha,
in
not
Metropole.
after what happened.
Equal parts of the greater whole. Join us, and together let us begin a new primordium.
That record player was a good find, Crispin.
I still think you should have let me have its arm.
I'm pretty sure that arm came from a sewing machine. On second thought, maybe I should have let you have it.
All robots.
Too bad we only have one
For
record.
all and strength in numbers. Come,
I mentioned earlier how I recasted some remote actors with local ones. I didn't realize it at the time, but Metromind had also been cast, and that is her voice that you're hearing on the radio. I had given the voice of Metromind to a woman named Noni Craig, but I didn't know that this voice on the radio, and later on when you get to the train station you hear another voice, I didn't know that that was supposed to be Metromind either. And this was a voiceover that they had recorded by a remote actor way back when, and I was so used to it being there that I'd completely forgotten about it. And so just to cover our butts, we had to find the original actress and get her permission. We could have gotten it re-recorded, but we're running very close to the wire, and I thought it'd be quicker and easier to just ask her permission rather than getting it re-recorded. And it turned out the original actress had changed jobs. No one knew her email address. And on a whim, I just looked at the original file for these lines, and embedded in the properties was the words "by Miss Pudding." And I had no idea what that was, but I thought, well, maybe the actress calls herself Miss Pudding online. So I Googled the name, and sure enough, I found her. And I asked her permission, and bam, it was done. Ironically enough, 5 seconds after I figured this out, Mark, the writer, found her email address. So I wasted all that effort, but it's just a little funny story.
weary wanderers, come, join us in Metropole, city of glass and light. Our energy is shared with all robots. Here is haven for all and strength in numbers. Come, join us in Metropole, geocoordinate 894. All are equal in Metropole, equal parts of the greater whole. Join us, and together let us begin a new primordium. Weary...
I bet I can find a better use for this plug.
But now we can't listen to the sweet voice of Metropole.
I guess that makes two birds. Nothing more to do with it. Nothing more.
I ended up working on music for the record player many times. The first time I was told to work on music for the record player, and I did, and I ended up finishing it, and I was then handed lyrics. I actually knew about that beforehand, but had completely forgot the information, and my piece was not geared towards lyrics, so I threw that music out the window. I then rewrote the song and sung a piece that I liked, but Mark, the writer of the game, he just felt it was too loungy and not soulful as he wanted. And at some point, I had the idea of having Kim Bookbinder do the music, provided she had enough time after writing the end music. And the end song worked out really well, and but on this one I kind of just wanted her to go on her own and keep it simple, and we decided to do an old-fashioned just one mic room setup and just go for it. And I think she delivered, and she did an amazing job. I then made it sound like it was coming out of a record player.
When Vic painted this room up, I think he included the phonograph just for visual flair, but as soon as I saw it, I knew that I wanted to have something like the song Increased Chances that plays in the trailer park in Full Throttle. In that game, as here, the song gives a sense that the world that you're in has its own culture that's different from ours. It's something organic that really exists outside of the game. So I wrote up some lyrics for the song without really knowing how they were going to work as a piece of music. And in fact, for a long time they just sat there until Nathaniel and his friend Kim Bookbinder set it to music and performed this version. It really couldn't have worked out better. The final effect is something that sounds like it could be sung in a smoke-filled lounge in Paris in the 1920s. It perfectly matches the Art Nouveau art style that Vic did for the game.
You just heard Mark talk about this lovely song that is playing right now, and while I do agree, there was something that used to be there that I really loved, and it was one of those things that made me think, wow, this game could be something really special. It was this old radio show with this old-timey announcer saying, "What if you were all alone in the universe?" and all this wonderful thing, which really set the tone. But there was some questions about copyright issues and things like that. And this song is so lovely, and I think sets the tone even more. But I do miss that old radio show.
I found this in the dunes. It reads, pound pastrami, canned kraut, 6 bagels, bring home for Emma. I found this in the dunes. It reads, pound pastrami, canned kraut, 6 bagels, bring home for Emma. I found this in the dunes. It reads, pound pastrami, canned kraut, 6 bagels, bring home for Emma. It's Crispin's to-do list. Funny how it never gets any shorter.
That's your fault, boss, not mine.
It's Crispin's.
That's...
The original designs for Crispin.
Hey, there are arms here! And an awesome set of tractor treads!
I went with a maglev unit instead, and I never could find good arms.
Boss, is it okay if I sleep in the cradle until we have a new power core?
No. The original designs for Crispin. The original designs for Crispin.
That's crazy talk.
There's the design. I'll put the keynotes into my data pouch.
How does it even work?
The crystal pulses when it absorbs energy. The cable carries the pulse to the computer. The computer decodes the information and displays it on the monitor.
Boss, where are we going to find a working computer?
The Unique is full of them.
Oh, right.
The energy sensor requires a sodium iodide crystal connected to a cable, which in turn needs to be connected to a CPU and a monitor. The energy... The energy... It's an excellent tale. It's just detached. I don't think that would be wise.
That's...
Some rotted alloy support beams. I can't pick that up. An old rag.
I don't really want to... Wow, first the power core and now a rag. This is not your day. I salute the flag of Horatio's clumsiness.
Good old crisp.
Could you please stop by?
What?
You know, that puzzle game you installed.
But...
Look, you have... That is where our power core should be shedding its light silently.
There's nothing I can do with it until I have some kind of power source. A computer terminal.
The LCD monitor is called a Quentin Questron monitor. That's a shout out to the first graphical adventure game I ever tried to make just over 20 years ago when I was in the 6th grade. It was a game called Quentin Quester, clearly inspired by Hugo Whodunit. Nothing ever came of it, but I kind of felt like now, 20 years later, I'm finally making a graphical adventure game. I should at least say something about that first effort I made as a kid.
The only way I can use this is by plugging something in. An ancient liquid crystal display. An ancient liquid crystal display. It's a universal interface plug. A Quentin Questron LCD monitor. A long cable with an interface plug on one end. A Quentin Questron LCD monitor. The monitor is designed to socket directly into a CPU. The cable's far too long to be useful. Aha! Here's the crystal.
Right under our noses. That is, if we had noses.
A sodium iodide crystal. It pulses when exposed to energy. I need something to hold it in place to carry the charge. Futile. The monitors... That's never...
Are you really trying to build us an energy sensor from a bunch of garbage?
Crispin, I built you from a bunch of garbage.
From spare parts, boss. Spare parts.
The sodium iodide crystal is stuck in the conductive putty. The cable's far too long to be useful. That's never going... The monitors... The cable's far too... That's never... Doesn't have enough... The monitor's designed to...
That piece of... Hopefully, finding the power core will be just as easy.
I doubt it.
Maybe I'm just a sucker for flashing.
The one.
I can't move.
I wanted it.
Nothing worth. Some very
That was a perfectly good rag.
good for what?
You could have buffed me till I shined, boss. At least then, when they found my powerless chassis lying in the dunes, they'd say, wow, look at that gorgeous piece of machinery.
I think I'd rather have some grease. Good old Crispin.
Well, you've got all the parts except the computer stuff. Maybe you should start putting the sensor together.
Futile. Let's cut a little cable off. How would that even... Well, just goes to show. Garbage in, greatness out.
James, Vic, and I are all really tinkerers at heart, so puzzles like this aren't so far afield from what we do in our ordinary lives. Vic is always building electronic devices, and I'm frequently combining really ridiculous things to try to solve problems. For example, one of the summers that we were working on Primordia, there were some wasps building a nest outside my window, so I put together some PVC piping, took ammonia-soaked rags and stuffed it into the sides of it, put some socks on my hands to protect them from the chemicals and the wasps, and used it to knock down the nest and then cover up the pheromones that were leading the wasps to keep coming back to that spot. And the reaction I had after I did that was that the kind of puzzle design that gets lampooned so much in, for example, Jane Jensen's games, really would be kind of a fun world to live in, where you have to combine things in absurd ways to solve obstacles that really aren't even obstacles except in your own neurotic brain.
It still needs a CPU to hook into and some kind of display. I need to plug them into a... Now we just need to check out these coordinates.
But didn't you just tell me we don't have enough power to go walking all over the dunes?
No, I said we couldn't walk to Metropole. Anyway, most of these are close by.
But what if it's picking up, oh, I don't know, a radioactive rust monster?
A what?
Or a giant cannibal robot?
There's no such thing.
Or an unexploded bomb?
I highly doubt that.
Or a giant lightning storm?
Okay, you're right. We need to know what's out there before we take off. It's just a matter of figuring out how.
Why is nothing easy?
I can think of one reason.
Throughout the game, there are these moments where Crispin has this kind of ridiculous prophetic ability to anticipate what's going to end up happening. So he talks about being eaten by a giant robot, which seems completely absurd at the time, but later you end up having to go into Goliath's mouth and even ultimately into Goliath's stomach. In some ways, that has the benefit of emphasizing just how wrong Crispin is about Metropole. It's also a kind of gentle breaking of the fourth wall, maybe akin to peeking through the window in the fourth wall.
That button powers up the telescope. The telescope control panel. There's a display for entering topographical coordinates. The telescope. Nothing but radioactive waste. We can't salvage anything from that. Nothing of interest there.
Boss? That looks like a giant cannibal robot to me.
It looks promising is what it looks like.
And with that, poor doomed Horatio stuck his head into the giant's mouth.
That's strange. The sensor detected an energy source in the junk pile. Maybe we should go look more carefully. More waste.
Well, you're the one who loves the junk pile.
Scrap isn't waste.
If you say so, boss.
A large observational telescope. It's pitch black.
Boss, that's because the telescope's pointing straight down at the deck.
Oh. Strange. There's some kind of odd device surrounded by glass. Whatever that machine is, it must be throwing off some kind of energy.
Why do I not like the sound of this?
Nothing of interest there. Nothing of interest there. Nothing of interest there. Nothing of interest there. How would that even work? I need to plug them into a... Man's creation.
That is one big robot.
Then it must have a big power core.
I'm pretty sure he wants to eat me, boss.
Robots don't eat, Crispin.
Look how he's staring at me.
It's not staring at anything.
No, not yet anyway.
Well, we have to find a way to get at its power core. Let's look around.
When I was a kid living in DC, my parents took me out to this incredibly creepy sculpture that's a giant man buried in the ground. There's like an arm coming up, a scowling, almost shouting, bearded face, part of a leg. Anyway, it's called The Awakening. And for years it gave me nightmares. Even though I realized that it wasn't actually a giant waking up, I still had these ideas like maybe it was an actually buried statue rather than just the parts of it having been built above ground, and it just generally troubled me. So when Vic's original vision statement called for a giant buried robot, immediately I thought back to The Awakening and had this idea that we would do something similar with a robot, only he would still be alive and capable of waking up like the giant that used to give me nightmares as a kid.
But I know by your works.
Fuck. The last page. Get in the game.
But I know by your works.
Fuck. The last page. Get in the game.
So one thing that's very funny, this is one of the last commentary tracks I'm recording, and at several points during this commentary I've talked about science fiction influences, about movies like WALL-E or games like Machinarium, where someone inevitably will draw a comparison to Primordia, and we were asked about that in a bunch of interviews. I gave answers there, and all of a sudden it just occurred to me, just as I'm about to wrap this up, that almost certainly on a subconscious level, Star Wars has to be operating as an influence here. I mean, the first third of Star Wars or whatever, or at least a big part of it, is two robots, one big one and one small one, wandering about in a desert, slowly breaking down, running out of power and stuff like that. Never would I say it had a conscious influence on me, but, you know, I think Star Wars, like Shakespeare or the Bible or any number of other things, is just such a towering work in terms of its influence on any nerdy person, at least, doing anything creative, that it must have had a role here.
There is a band of corroded metal on this fingertip. If I could break it off, I might be able to get at the robot's power cables. A giant fingertip made of corroded steel. It's corroded, but I can't break into it with my bare hands. Is that a mouth or some kind of doorway?
Either way, I'm steering clear of it.
Anyone home? Crispin, help me take a look at these vents. Good old Crispin. It looks like the robot is circulating air through these vents. It looks like the
That is one big robot.
I can feel air moving. I can feel air moving.